Hello, my name is Simon Poitvin. I am currently working at SID, a company based in France, as a system administrator. 3 years ago, one of my first missions was to install an on-prem environment for Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation. And first, I read the step-by-step provided by Microsoft. It's a very instructive guide, but I would appreciate the same guideline with a video, so here I am. As I didn't find any video about the full installation on YouTube, I decided to record it on my own. My goal here is to show and explain the different steps based on the Microsoft administration guide. I hope this video will help some people, and feel free to comment if you appreciate this video and if you have any question. During this video, I will follow the guide. First, maybe you already read it. It's some information about the infrastructure, so you can have many interesting information. And now we will jump to the step number 1. It's plan your domain name and DNS zone. As you can see, you will need two zones, one for AX to connect to Dynamics 365 with a web browser for the end user, and one SF zone. It's about the service fabric cluster administration. So step number 2, as you can see, this is mandatory to create a large number of certificates to secure your environment. If users connect only from your internal network or through a VPN, you can use your internal certification authority to generate the certificate. But on the other hand, if you want to access from the public internet, it's mandatory to ask for a certificate from a public certification authority like those mentioned here. And for each certificate, you will find the purpose, the explanation, and the additional requirements. But don't worry, because we will use the script provided by Microsoft, and we will set up this automatically. And there is an important thing at the end. You can use the wildcard certificate. It's the your subdomain.domain, and you can use this wildcard only to secure the first level subdomain. So as explained, if you use a certificate for start.onprem.cotoso.com, it won't be valid for the second level subdomain. So be careful, because you will need to create a new one if you need to cover the second level subdomain. Let's go to step number 3, plan your user and service accounts. As you can see, here you will need to create 7 group managed service account and 1 SQL user here. This one is not used anymore because it was during the first installation, it was a domain account, but now it's more secure to use this group managed service account. And if you plan to deploy 10.0.29, like we will gonna do in this video, you have to create this group managed service account for our service account. So as for the certificate, each account has a very specific use, and this will make troubleshooting easier later on, as the scope is restricted. Step number 4, create DNS zone and R records. When you have chosen the DNS zone for AX and for SF cluster, you have to configure an A record for each IP of your AOS. For example, if you have 6 AOS, you have to register 6 IP. And in my video, I will only set up 3, AOS node. So I will record the 3 IP address. So I will go to my domain server, and I will go to DNS manager, and as you can see, I've got my seed.lab domain, and I will directly create my record here. So in my case, I will just follow the guide and select AX, and here I need to write my first IP address for AOS number 1. I will do the same for AOS number 2, and the same for AOS number 3. As you can see, you will need to do the same for the orchestrator, so the SF zone have to point to the IP address of your orchestrator node. Again, in my example, I have only 3 orchestrator nodes, so I will record 3 a record for my SF name. And here I will select orc number 1, then orc number 2, and orc number 3. We can check from one server if the NSLOOKUP is pointing to the correct IP address. So here I can see my 3 orchestrator, and if I do the same for the AX zone, I can see that it's pointing to my 3 AOS IP address. Let's go to step number 5. It will be quick because my VM are already joined to the domain, so I will directly jump to step number 6. Download setup script from LCS. So Microsoft has provided several scripts to help improve installation experiences. It's important to keep up with updates to these scripts and always use the latest version available because they bring new features, best practice, checks and quality checks, and by using an old version you could miss out something. And I advise you to systematically install from the same VM. In my case, I am on my orc number 1, and this way when I change from one environment to another, I know that I will always find the infrastructure script on my orc number 1. Another best practice is to put the infrastructure folder on a file share, and then you can access from your network. So as you can see, we will need to go to LCS. You need to log in with your account. I will go to my project. No, it's wrong. You don't have to go to a project. It's on this library. It's the shared asset library, and you can go on model, and then you can see the deployment script version 2.17. As you can see today, it's 18 October, and the last upload was on 11, so you know it's you always need to download the latest version. So I will click and it will download the infrastructure script. Here is my folder. You can unblock it, and then I will extract it on my orc number 1. Yes. So inside you can see there is a changelog with the version number and README. And inside the script folder, you can see a lot of PowerShell script, and we will use them to configure each VM, to create our cluster, to configure the SQL Server, the database, the certificate. It will cover the whole installation, and it's a very useful tool. So thanks to the team. As I said before, I always do my installation from my org number 1. And as there is some account creation from account creation on my domain, you can install the Windows role ARES80 to do it remotely with the admin account directly from this VM, and you won't have to switch between the DC and your org number 1, etc. So now it's done. I have downloaded my script. Step 7, describe your configuration. This is one of the most important part of the installation. Indeed, you will describe in this config template.xml file the whole of your configuration. If you go to the file, just tips, I always rename the config template file, because we will update it, and there is as many as a file as environment, so I always write the date, for example, and the environment. And if you open the XML file, you will find many information. So the name of your group managed service account. At the end, you will find the name, the host name of your different nodes, the IP address, the SQL VM. You can find the file share, the SQL user, the name of the database. There is a huge part with certificate and the thumbprint and the DNS name, so it's very important to write this file carefully, because a mistake or a typo in this file can have very important consequences in the rest of the installation. So for the GMSA account, I advise you to add -prod or -test to indicate in which environments they will be used. In my example, I will edit the domain. As I said before, mine is seed lab. So I will add and replace the contoso.com with seedlab here. And about the GMSA name, for example, the local agent will be la.prod. It has to be shorter than 15 characters, so be careful with the long name. I will do the same with the other GMSA. Okay. As you can read, this one is deprecated from 10.0.20 and we don't use domain user anymore for X. As you can see, we have choose from a name for our GMSA. Now we will need to create it on the domain. So I will copy only the first part because I rename my config template, so I will use tab to I am using a domain admin account, so I have the right to create the different account. I didn't save my file, so I will run the script again. As you can see, I have an error because it can't find my computer, MR1 and ORC1 and etc. under my domain, so it's not able to allow this computer to retrieve the password, and the problem is at the end of the file because I didn't edit this part. So here you will need to edit the VM name and the IP address for each of your node. I will pause the video and resume as soon as I have a edit. Now it's fine. As I said before, it's very important that the config template file is up to date, and if there is some wrong information or typo or something, there will be a problem. Here there is a cluster name. You can edit it if you want, again with the name of your environment. And again, if we execute the same command, now it will find the computer on my domain, and it can allow my, for example, my orc 123 to retrieve the password from my SVC local agent GMSA. So it's fine. There is another command, for example, if you change the GMSA account, or if you add a new node, you will have to execute this command again, and it will set the right for each computer. Let's go to step number 8, setup file storage. For Dynamics 365, we need at least 2 network shares. The best is to create them on a file server to optimize the performance. The first one is called AOS storage. We will find here all the documents related to Dynamics 365, attached file, Office export, for example, imported or exported file, etc. The second one is agent. It will centralize a package we will download from LCS and a credential folder. And the third one is optional. It's called diagnostic store, and it allows to centralize the logs of your Service Fabric cluster. It's however possible to keep these logs locally for each node of your cluster. And here again, it's important to be careful about the rights of the different accounts and computers on the network shares. Because, for example, we can see that the GMSA local agent will need the full control permission on this file share. I will show you as it's a demo environment and I will delete it. I have set up the two share on my management reporter node. I will open the file share to show you. As you can see, I have a D drive with my 2 directory, and here you can see my 2 file share. It's only MR, yes. Step 9, set up SQL Server. We are not going to discuss the installation of SQL Server because there is a multitude of configuration. And in this video, I have a single SQL VM, but the Dynamics 365 installation is the same with a SQL cluster and always on, etc. As you can see here, during the installation, you need to verify that the database engine, SSRS, full text search, etc. are installed in your SQL 2019 VM. It's recommended to use group manage service account to run the SQL service, and in the config template.xml file we will fill in the SQL cluster configuration. And again, you can do it manually or you can do it with a script provided by Microsoft. You have to decide if you use this or not. I will just edit at the end of my file. I just have one SQL VM called SQL, and here I don't have listener name, so if you have a single SQL instance, leave it blank. Let's jump to step number 10. We will now create certificate with these 2 commands. For those who have been installing on-prem environment for some time, this part has been greatly simplified, and thanks to the teams that designed the infrastructure script, because we saved a lot of time and a lot of mistake because everything is automatic. So again, we will need to carefully fill in the config template file, because as you can see at the top, there is one block for each certificate we will need to create. And here, for example, the first one is the wildcard. We can choose to generate it self-sign, so directly on my orchestrator, for example, or it's recommended to use the ADCS cert. So it's set to true. As you can see, for each certificate, it's set up to true. I need to edit the DNS name here because it has to match the DNS we recorded. Here it's star.seedlab, it's only for the name. Here it's the name of the pfx file. Here we will need to specify the DNS name for AX, for Service Fabric, and the wildcard. So it's quite easy. For me, it's sf.seed.lab and ax.seed.lab, but here, as it's URL, we will need to write like this, because if we leave seedlab, it won't be valid for the DNS name of Dynamics 365. Again, for the subject, we will use seed.lab. You don't have to edit this 3 part because it's a provider, the key usage, and enhanced key usage. It's when we will ask a new certificate, it will pick this setup. So it's very important to not touch this. Here we will see that the thumbprint will be automatically filled when we will create the certificate. And here we have to specify the domain user or group that will be given permission to access the PFX files without a password. So I set up my account to use this certificate, and I will add the domain admin, for example, because it's always useful to export a certificate without a password. So here I will set up the same for each certificate. That's fine. As you can see, it's a generic name here, so I prefer to use the -prod because you will have many different PFX files and certificate on your store, so it's useful to have dedicated name. We will see later that this one is common with the other environment hosted on the same Microsoft tenant, so we won't tag with the name of the environment. We will leave like that. If we scroll down, we can see the SSRS certificate. Again, I will fill my SSRS node. So for me, it's SSR1. I will need the same file name and the same DNS name. SQL cluster, I have only one virtual machine. It's a regression suite automation tool. I won't use it right now, and I won't use this one and this one, so I just leave it, and it's disabled, as you can see here, and disabled and disable. Here I will copy my first command. Again, I will edit the config template.xml because it's not my file name. So yeah, it's already exists because I have already set up one environment. You can imagine I have executed the script, and on my certificate template now I can see I have my two model here. So I will generate the different certificate in my config template using these two models. So now I can execute the second command. Here there is really nothing to do, just to write, and we will have our certificate and the thumbprint. So as you can see, my XML file has been updated with the thumbprint. If I go to Notepad, I will reload my file, and yes, ta-da! You can see there is really nothing to do, so it's really a great improvement. The last thing we need to do in this step 10 is exporting the certificate. So we will execute this command, and it will export the different certificates into a directory with the name of the VM. So of course, it won't export each certificate in each directory. It will only export the necessary certificates. So I will execute the export certificate. And now in my script directory, I can see there is one cert folder with the pfx and cr file for each of my certificate, and a VM folder with the name of each VM of my node, with node. And as you can see, inside there is some pfx file. Then we will jump to step 11, setup SSIS. Again, we will go quickly on this part because I have already installed this component, and to enable data management, you must install SSIS on each iOS VM. Be careful to install the SSIS 2019 with SQL 2019 because it won't match. Step 12, setup SSRS. This step 12 will only configure two empty databases and set the proper right. It will not configure the SSRS. And so the first thing to do is to install SSRS 2019 with the standalone installer. It is important to not configure anything manually like you could do with AX 2012, and this step will be done automatically during the deployment of the reporting services application. So I need to go to my BI node. For me, it's gonna be prod-ssrs1. So I will log in. You will need to execute some scripts. So yes, we will need to browse the infrastructure script, open PowerShell, and here again the two commands we will use refer to our configuration file. That's why I remind you that it's very important that the information you have entered in it is correct. In this video, we have only one SSRS node for this sandbox environment, but it's possible to configure a high availability for this role. I will copy the first command. So as you can see, the first command will map the group managed service account to the following database. But I just want to show you. As you can see, it's empty, so there are no database to map the GMSA. I need to install the SSRS first, and I will resume the video as soon as it's done. Now my installation is completed. As you can see, I will need to configure manually the settings after that, but if you read the blue tail, you must install the database engine when you install SSRS, but do not configure the SSRS instance. And a special thing, I need to refresh my page because there is one more important note now. As you can see, this was the date, and if I refresh, there is some new information. I will go to SSIS, and yes, this is an additional note. Do not use name instance when you set up the database engine or the SSRS service. It's very important because you won't be able to deploy this app on your Service Fabric cluster. Now, on my VM, I will close the wizard, I will refresh, and I still don't have any database. I will initialize this with the first script. So I will execute the first one with my config template dedicated to this installation. As you can see, I will now have two databases, one dynamic SAIX report server and the same with temp DB. The second one is configure. So yes, it will set up some permission for your GMSA account. So yes, this is the same node, but the script will not configure SSRS. It will be during the deployment. So don't worry if you can't browse the URL, for example, like we can do with AX 2012. It's forbidden to use this wizard. Let's go now to step number 13. Now that our different components are installed, we will move on to the VM configuration step. And the idea is to export for each node only the script and certificate needed for each type. So as you remember, there is 4 node type, one for OS, one for management reporter, one for SSRS, and one for orchestrator. So since the beginning of October, it's now possible to specify the version of Dynamics 365 that you want to install. If we compare two folders, we observe that they are not. So in our example, we will use the 10.029 to deploy the base deployment. If we go to our infrastructure script, there is a VM folder with one folder for each node. And if we go back to one OS folder and if we compare with, for example, org type, you can see that they are not identical. And inside each, for example, CSV file, there is not the same information. So it's important to use the folder dedicated to each VM. Then we need to download these components from the internet to store them on a file share. We will be able to install them simply via the network. It's important to respect the name of the file because the script tries to find such or such name. For example, for this ODBC driver 13, the expected file name will be this one. So be careful to match the same name. And as you can see, you will need the two management studio installer, so be careful to get the proper file name. For me, I have already downloaded the different file on my MSC file share. It's not very clean, but as you can see, there is a different file. Then you will need to execute the next script. Here I will use the green command to install the remote prerequisite on the VM. And as you can see, you have to fill in the MSC file share the network shares so that the VM can fetch the installer they need. Let's copy this one. I will paste it, and I need to copy my file share and okay, let's execute this one. It will zip each folder of each VM in a temp zip folder, and after that there will be authentication pop-up, and you will need to use an admin account with a credential to install remotely, to copy the zip file remotely and install the different component on each VM. I will pause the video as soon as we will see the authentication pop-up, because it will take a long time to install the different thing. Okay. So it will configure everything on each node, and maybe at the end of the installation you will need to restart the VM, and you will need to do this each time it's necessary. As you can see, I have already installed the different components, so I will resume the video as soon as it's finished. As you can see here, a reboot may be required for the change to take effect after the installation of Management Studio. And if you read carefully on the step-by-step, each time that you are prompted restart the machine, make sure you rerun the configure -prerequisite command after each restart until all the prerequisites are installed. So I will restart this node. Okay, yes, I am already logged in, so I will do that manually. Back to the step-by-step, we will run the following command to complete the VM setup. Again, I will use the green command because I am using the remoting. I will resume the video as soon as it's finished. Now it's done. The last test command allows us to validate that the different VM meets the requirements to deploy Dynamics 365, and it will check the certificates, the rights, the GMSA account, the firewall rules, the authorized protocol, etc. So it's very important to always validate before deploying a package that everything is fine, and you don't have expired certificate or something that has been disabled by a GPO. Here I will show you an error on my AOS 3 validation. So this is my VM hostname, and here I can see that this group managed service account does not belong to the administrator group. So instead of re-executing the entire script, you can connect directly to this VM. And as you can see, there will be on the root of C drive D365 folder, and here you will find the different PowerShell commands. So I will be able to execute the test only on this VM. It will be faster to troubleshoot. So yes, I still need to install this SSIS component, so I need to check this account. I will go to the computer management. Maybe it's an old account, so I will remove it, and then I will re-execute the configure, then the complete prereq. Here you will need the MSC file path. So it's fine for this one, except the first error. As you can see, my account has been successfully added to the administrator group, so I will execute the test script again. So it's fine for the administrator group, but I forgot to remove the previous GMSI from the print operator group. So let's go. Now it's fine, and the test command will be fine. So everything is fine now, and it was swifter than re-executing the whole command from my org number 1 with remoting. Now that everything is okay, we will move to step number 14 to deploy our Service Fabric cluster. With the link, we can download the file on our orchestrator number 1, for example. We will generate with this command the configuration file of our cluster based on our config template. So one more time, it's very important to double or triple check the information in this file because it will impact the configuration of the Service Fabric cluster. Let's download the file. As you can see, you will need to go to Properties and check the Unblock checkbox. And then you can extract the folder. I will put this one right here. There are several template files in the Service Fabric cluster. I will choose the same one as a step-by-step. As you can see, it's this one. It's a cluster config for multi-machine. So to avoid some mistake, I will delete the other one. And now I will copy my command. I need to edit this one because here my config template has this file name and the configuration, the JSON file is located on my folder. Let's go. So now I have a file, a cluster config.json file. I will need to copy this file to my Service Fabric path. When we have created a file, I advise you to rename it so as not to be lost if you have several environments to manage and deploy. I also write the months and the year to keep track of the configuration. I will copy this one to this folder. Then you will need to open PowerShell in this folder. I will close the other one. And as you can see, there is two commands. The first command is to test if the configuration meets the prerequisites. So I will execute it. As you can see, there is a yellow text because, as you remember, I did not use a file share for Diagnostic Store. I am using the local directory for each VM. So it's not an error, but it's only a warning. And there is some fine-tuning you can do when, okay, here this is my previous installation on the different AOS number 2 and ORC number 1, so I need to clean the machine before installing a new Service Fabric cluster. So it's very easy to do that because there is a clean fabric script to execute. And it will stop the service and delete the different folder to clean, yes, the installation. So I will need to do that on my AOS number 2. But of course, if it's a clean install, you won't get that error message. I will go to my file share because I have already the Service Fabric folder, and I will execute the clean fabric script. Now I can check again my configuration. I just want to show you some fine-tuning, but everybody is free to do his own, but you can find the different node from your cluster with the type. And here I will only keep 1 day for log retention because I'm not using it. I will just shorten the path to have the SF folder on the root of my C drive. Here you can see, instead of the thumbprint, now you can see the certificate command name, so it's very, very useful for the future certificate rotation. It's the same for the client certificate to connect to the admin web page. And at the end, here you can install it on a D drive, for example. So here you will need to change the letter. For example, on my VM it's only a lab environment, so I have only one drive. And again, I will delete this one. I can save my configuration, and then I will need to execute again the test command. As the test is successful, we will run the following command to deploy the cluster. In my example, I am connected to internet, so I will use this command, but of course, if you want to do an offline installation, you will use the green command. I need to accept the license. Then I will pause the video because it will take some time because my virtual machine are not very fast, and I will resume the video to do the final test with the Service Fabric URL. Once your cluster is created, you can access it via the URL you entered in your DNS, and you can copy and paste the URL here and edit with the hostname. I will open incognito, and as you can see, I need to choose my certificate. So for example, if you don't have this pop-up, you will need to open the console. You can add the certificate. You need to choose my user account because the pop-up here, it will pick a certificate in your current user store. So for example, I can see that this is my certificate to authenticate to my service cluster. And if you don't have it, of course, you can go to your infrastructure script folder, then the cert folder, and then install the client pfx file on the current user store. So I will click OK. Now I am able to connect to my cluster. Here you can choose to disable the telemetry if you want, and you can choose the advanced mode. Just to show you, you can just restart a node here, and with the advanced mode you can deactivate and remove the node, so it's advanced. And here you can see my 3 scene node, it's my orc 1, 2, and 3. So let's go to the step number 15. Configure LCS connectivity for the tenant. Now that our cluster is operational, we will configure the connection between internet and LCS and my local orchestrator. Indeed, to download a development or update package from LCS, it's necessary to register the on-prem local agent certificate that we created earlier. As a reminder, if you have several environments, it's only necessary to register one certificate per tenant. The first command installs the required version on your VM, and the second one will only test if the thumbprint from your on-prem local agent is already registered on your tenant. And if you previously installed Azure ARM, you'll need to remove it because the new module is not compatible with any existing Azure ARM installation. This command has to be run on the infrastructure folder, of course, and remember, when we need to copy a thumbprint from a certificate, we need to copy it from PowerShell because there will be maybe some strange character. After that test, you can register the certificate with this command without the -test. In some cases, if your account is connected to more than one tenant, the order may fail. It's indicated at the end that you can specify the tenant ID to be sure to point to the right place. Let's go to the next step. In this step, we will use the default configuration. So previously, our ADCS generate a certificate for our SQL Server, but you can of course use a public certificate or a self-sign. If we go to our config template file, you need to go to the SQL part. Here you can see the name of, I have only one SQL node. You can find the thumbprint and the protect2 account. So this is mandatory to execute the next step. Once again, we will use remoting, so the script written in green. If you want to have the detail of all this automatic action, you can go on this part on the manual and you can read what this will do. Let's go to my infrastructure folder again. I will paste my command and execute it. As you can see, it will turn on the SQL encryption and add the SQL account to read this certificate. So as you can see, my certificate is AA05B. If I go to my SQL, I can open the SQL manager. I need to go to properties. So encryption is forced to yes, and the certificate is this one. And if I click on view detail, this is the good thumbprint. So for this part, it's fine. Just another thing, yes, in my example, this is my SQL prod account that is running the SQL Server services. So this account has to have a read right on this certificate. Let's go to step number 17, configure the database. Now that our database server is operational, we will create the 3 databases needed for Dynamics 365. As a reminder, there are 3 databases, AXDB for the data and the code, orchestrator data to manage the deployment package on the environment, and financial reporting for the management reporter reports. You have to connect to LCS. Here, you need to go back to model, yes, and download the file you want. Microsoft provides 2 back files, one empty and one with demo data. Here we will use the empty file because it's quicker to download. As you can see, it's essential to take the database corresponding to the version you want to deploy. In this demo, we will deploy 10.0.29, so I download the corresponding file. If you remember, at the end of the config template file, you need to provide the backup file path. So I have already do that, but on my MSI shared, I will put my file here. Then I can copy my AXDB path and paste it here. And just a warning, because when you will execute the first script, the user who is running the SQL service and the user who is running the script should have read access on the folder or the share where the backup file is located. Now I will copy the command and paste it. Yes, I will execute this command directly on my SQL server. I just need to go to my infrastructure script on my orchestrator. Just to show you in the same time on my SQL. I will need to choose a password for AXDB admin. So yes, if I refresh, I can now see that I've got a orchestrator data database. And if I go to security user, I can see that my local agent account, GMSA account, is mapped to this database. I will now execute the second command. This one will restore the database from the specified backup file. It seems that I didn't choose the proper backup. I will check again. And yes, this one is very old, so I have... yes, it has to be this one. I will edit my path here. Okay, much better. So it's fine, I think. I will refresh. Okay, I can see my XDB empty database, and I can see my different GMSA account mapped to this database. So it's fine now. I will go to the step-by-step to copy the configure database command. I forgot to mention that we set up some write on TempDB, as you can see here. My XDB admin has some write, so it's great, but as soon as you will restart the VM or restart the SQL services, it will erase this, so you will get an error message. So a good thing is to fix that with a store procedure. If you go to the troubleshoot, yes, this is the error. So after a SQL restart, you will lose the XDB admin account will lose the right on TempDB. So you need to copy this store procedure. Of course, you need to edit the account. For example, if you use XDB admin underscore prod or something, and you need to specify here the IXSF account with your domain, and then it will create a store procedure, and it will be fine as soon as you will restart the SQL. You won't have the error on the Service Fabric cluster. Now we will go to the configure the financial reporting database command. Again, I need to write the password. So it's fine now. As you can see, the empty database financial reporting has been created here. And again, you can find the empty database with a few without tables, and in the security user you can find the different GMSA with the different role. Now we can go to step number 18, encrypt credential. Here the first step is to copy your infrastructure folder to an iOS node, or you can use the network share, and we will use configure credential JSON script to automatically encrypt the XDB password and XDB account with the certificate we created earlier. Before, everything has to be done manually, And now with only one script, it will create everything based on the credential.json file provided in the infrastructure script. So it's very in a few seconds you can do this instead of many minutes and many errors a few months ago. I will go to my iOS number 1. Again, I will go to my infrastructure script. I will paste my command. Okay, so maybe there is a missing path. It's the path of my agent. Maybe I didn't write it. Oh yes, it's missing here. So as I said before, I put my agent shared on my management reporter node. So I will paste the path here, and it's the same for my AOS storage. I will paste it here. But remember that if you want the best performances, you will have to set up the AOS storage share on a file server dedicated to that and not a node. Let's execute this command again. So as you can see on the agent credential, a file already exists. So I will overwrite the existing one. I will here it's not the password. You just have to write your XDB admin account, because you can see some star. I often think that I need to enter my password, but no, it's the XDB admin account. Now I need to provide and write my password. And here I will choose no, because I don't want to configure this functionality. So as you can see, the timestamp, I have my credential.json with the two thumbprint, and everything is fine. We can go to the next step. It's configure ADFS. So ADFS is an important thing because it will publish the application. So if you just have one ADFS, it's going to be easy. But if you want to configure one ADFS for multiple environments, you will have to do that manually, but it's fine to do that. You will need to copy the different command here on your ADFS. You will need, of course, to install and to deploy the ADFS role. And here I won't show you this part because I already set up my ADFS VM for another environment. So it's a specific configuration here because I want to reuse the same ADFS instance for multiple environments. But you just have to follow the different script, and yes, you can publish with the URL of your environment. And in the ADFS management, you will see the 6 application, and you can see the URL, and it will be fine. For me, for example, I just want to, I will show you to add another one. I will do that. Oh. And I will edit with my prod URL. and you will have to do that for a different application. An important thing is to install the ADFS certificate on all of your VM from OS node type, and if you want to check if it's fine, you need to open this URL in a web browser from an OS and check what's happening. As you can see, I've got a JSON, so it's fine. And if you check here, you can see that the connection is secure and the certificate is valid, and yes, everything is fine. But it will expire in 3 December, so I will need to rotate it. Now we have set up everything, and everything is fine to deploy the D365 environment, but the last step is to install the local agent on our orchestrator, and then this local agent will deploy the different package and application on the Service Fabric cluster. So back to LCS, you will need to open your on-prem implementation project. As you can see, there is already one environment deployed. You will need to go to project settings, on-prem connector, and here we will add a new on-prem connector. So you need to choose a name. Here you can download the agent installer. You will need to copy it on your orchestrator. I will go to the download folder to unblock the zip file, and then I will extract it on my source folder, for example. Then we can go to configure agents. I will enter my configuration. So as you can see, there is a lot of field you need to write. Here you can use this command to automatically get the information. So here, this is the client certificate. I will paste it. Here you need to enter the IP of your orchestrator, for example, number 1. You can choose a name here. Maybe you can use the same than your Service Fabric cluster. If I open my cluster config, you can find the name here. I will choose the same. I will paste the server certificate template. I will write my tenant service principal certificate template. This is the one we recorded on our Azure tenant. Here I will copy my file share for OS storage. I will specify my database server, the name of my orchestrator database, and I will copy my GMSA. And here it's a new thing. It's very cool because you can choose the SQL Server version, and you can also click to enable the Microsoft 365 compatibility, etc. So you can choose the different option if you want to use RSAT or something. I will now save this and download the JSON file. As you can see, if I open the file again, I will rename it with my environment and maybe the month, even if we are in November. And if you open it, you can find every information you enter on the user interface. So I will copy this one in the other directory here. And now I will open a PowerShell. And as you can see, we will install the agent. So yes, I will use a command prompt because there is always some strange behavior. So the command is local agent install and the JSON file. And an important thing is that the user you are using to install the local agent has to have the DB owner permission on the orchestrator database. I will execute this. And as you can see, you can find the connection string to my SQL server and the different properties. And if I connect to my Service Fabric cluster, I should see some application here. First, it will install the LBD telemetry application, and then it will install the agent. So as soon as the else of this application is fine, it will install the second one. As you can see on my orc type, I can see this application and the else state is fine. Now it will go to the next one. Here we should see the new application, and again on the orc 1, 2, 3 we will see the application install. And as soon as this one has been installed, we will validate the connection from LCS. After the local agent is successfully installed, go back to your on-prem connector in LCS. For information, if you click on configure here on the slot, without having validated your agent, you will be blocked with this message. So we need first to validate the communication between the local agent and LCS. Let's go in project settings and on-prem connector. Back to my prod lab connector, I can click on edit, and on validate setup, I will message agent. We can check locally on the orchestrator who is the primary if he received the validation. So you need to go to your service fabric on local agent, and then on the bridge service we can see that the primary is my orc number 2. So I will need to log in and go to event viewer to check the log, the dynamics log, and then we will see the message. As you can see, there is my AX local agent here, and yes, it just responds to ping from LCS. If we go back on LCS, you need to refresh this page to view updated validation status. So back on validate setup, I can see that my agent connection is established. Let's go to step number 21, tear down CredSSP. If remoting was used in This video I used the remoting script during the setup, so be sure to run the following command after the setup is complete. Let's jump to the final step of this long video, deploy your finance and operation environment from LCS. Before opening LCS, here is a checklist that the LBD team gave us during the workshop. Thanks to them again, because it's very useful. The 7 points of this checklist must be green before continuing, otherwise the deployment will fail and you will lose time. I won't go over the 7th point, just rewind the video, but if all these points are validated, it's gonna be a smooth deployment. So in theory, everything is now optimal to deploy your environment. On LCS, on the home page of your project, you have to click on Configure in a free slot. Here I will choose my base deployment. As you can see, we are not able to deploy every application version. You need, if for example, if you want to deploy 10.0.30, you will need to use the 29 base deployment, then apply the 10.0.30 package. So let's go. Next. As you can see now, I'm able to choose my connector. Here you will need to choose an environment name. Once again, everything has been thought by the team to make the work easier and avoid the mistake. The easiest way is to run this command from your ADFS. That VM must have access to ADFS and the DNS server settings. Again, you will need to use the shared infrastructure script folder. Now we have all the information. I will execute it again to get the metadata endpoint. Yes. Now you can just copy paste this value in a notepad, for example, and then you will copy and paste the value in the corresponding field on LCS. If you are using the same IDFS for several environments, you won't be able to get the AX URL, so you will need to enter this manually. Here you will need to write the local admin account. It's not your account using to connect to LCS, it's really your local account. So in my lab, it's syd.lab. Here I will paste the OpenID metadata endpoint we created in step 19. For the reporting services, you must first enter the fully qualified domain name of your SSRS single node or high availability listener. So in my case, I only have one VM, so it's this one. And then in this field, you can specify every SSRS virtual machine. Then you can change the default web server endpoint, but in my case, I will keep the default value and I will continue to fill the different field. As I said before, I'm using the same ADFS for several environments. So here, the value is not the good one because it's the other environment. I need to manually edit the DNS hostname of my Dynamics 365 instance. Then I will copy my different GMSA. Be careful to not copy space because it's very hard to check this when you have some error during deployment. So don't copy space or blank in the field. And then I will copy my different temp print. Okay. Be careful to copy paste the proper temp print on the proper field. I don't use entity store, so I will leave this blank. And I will save this. Once you have filled all the fields, you can accept the license and launch the deployment. A deployment consists of two main parts. The first one is the preparation on the LCS side on the Microsoft server of your package and the local download on your virtual machine on Orchestrator. And the second part is the installation of the application on your Service Fabric cluster. To follow the progress locally, log in into the SF cluster and see which node is primary for orchestration services. In my case, it's again prod org2, but you know, as soon as I will reboot this node, the active secondary will become the primary, so it will change. So log in to prod org2. If you check on the documentation on the troubleshooting tab, it's recommended to create a custom log in the event viewer by selecting this log. It's in Application and Services Logs, Microsoft Dynamics, and AX Local Agent. So I will connect to my org. I have already created this view, but if you want to create it, it's here. You can browse Application and Service, Microsoft. You just click on Dynamics, and then you will have every log on the same view, and you can filter with error and everything else. It's recommended to create this custom view on each node of your cluster because you will be able to check what's going on your Dynamics 365 environment. So this is where this video ends. There will be a lot of things to tell about the deployment and troubleshooting, but maybe it will be the subject of another video, depending on your feedback. Thanks again for watching. I hope I've helped you, and feel free to ask your question in a comment. Last advice is to follow the Yammer group. You can find the link on the main page. Yes, here you can join the LBD group. So this Yammer group is a gold mine for information. So see you later there.